Welcome to The Third Story. I'm Leo Sidran. There's an old saying attributed to many people over the years that says, writing about music is like dancing about architecture. Then again, there's an even older saying attributed to Goethe that says, architecture is frozen music, in which case dancing to it might make perfect sense. In any case, there is a bit of truth in the idea that some things are better left unspoken, ineffable, undefined. You know, like how in some religious traditions you're not supposed to speak the name of God? Well, for some of us, music is our religion, and we stand before the Lord of Song, as Leonard Cohen said. Are we meant to speak its name?
No way, yeah.
Well, you're asking the wrong person, because as you know, I love talking about this stuff. It's what I do. In fact, I just got back from a couple weeks in Europe touring behind my own music, and I'm proud to report that the Spanish press has dubbed me El Gran Conversador, the great conversationalist. I have reached the top of the mountain.
I know it.
So I was delighted to discover a new book written by my new friend, Mike Errico, called Music, Lyrics, and Life, a field guide for the advancing songwriter. It's about songwriting, but really, it's about the life of the songwriter. Mike teaches songwriting at NYU, Yale, and Wesleyan. He's a serious thinker and a serious talker, but he's also a musician. He came of age in a music business that no longer exists,
I know it.
where a young songwriter could get signed to a contract on the strength of a handful of acoustic songs that played well in downtown coffee shops and song circles at the bitter end on Bleecker Street.
No way, yeah.
And that's what happened to him. He was signed, sealed, and delivered, fed to the lions and spit back out, and along the way he made a whole mess of music, a bunch of records, wrote a whole bunch of songs, and developed his approach both to writing and to teaching songcraft. He explains in his book that he was sold as Dave Matthews meets Stevie Wonder, a description that dogged him for years. I think that was just a shorthand to quickly explain that he was soulful and folky at the same time. I like this song of his, the closing track from his 2011 album, Wander Away. It's called Someday.
Someday I'm gonna get where I'm going. Someday somewhere past the blindness of my faith, I keep my eyes on the plans I've made, and someday I'll get there. Someday, past the smiles that crack like frozen lakes under children's figure skates. Well, I am going past all of my own mistakes, 1,000 more I've yet to make, but I am going. I'm going.
Mike and I spoke recently about his own personal story as well as the book, which I really cannot recommend enough. It's simply wonderful. In our talk, we considered such questions as, what is a song? What it means to make something non-trivial and undeniable, the important distinction between how things act versus how they are, the fallacy of art, the search for timelessness, the question of whether or not songwriting is improving, what is melodic math, and what do Ani DiFranco, the Beatles, Billie Eilish, or McDonald's have to do with any of it? Third-story.com is your place. Patreon.com/thirdstorypodcast is your other place. And if you actually want to go someplace, I'll be at Barbès in Brooklyn this Thursday, November 11th, with my own band, and then at the bitter end on Bleecker Street on Thursday, November 18th, playing in a song circle, much like the kind that Mike Errico used to play in. In my case, I'll be sharing the stage with a few friends, including the great Will Lee, who was, as you may remember, my first ever guest on this show. Okay, without further preamble, here's my talk with Mike Errico, author of the new book Music, Lyrics, and Life, a field guide for the advancing songwriter. For the first 5 minutes of the talk, Mike's sound is a little questionable, but stick around because it gets much better. It's like waiting for the chorus. If you're old enough to remember what that was like, then you should have no trouble with it. Mike Errico, I have to tell you, I feel talking to you right now like I did when I was in college because I am 2/3 of the way through the book that I feel like I'm about to take the exam on. And that was basically how I got through the whole time.
Oh, it's good. It's all just the same at the end.
It just repeats again, right?
It repeats. It's like a great song.
It's like the last chorus. It repeats but gets bigger.
Exactly.
But I did read enough into the book to know that I am sitting in front of the musical love child of Dave Matthews and Stevie Wonder.
Wow. Yeah. That's dogged me for a while. Yeah. That's so funny that you mentioned that. Because it is brought up in the book. That is how I was introduced to market. You know, that was the shelf talker that they stuck in my chest as I walked around the country. And yeah, turns out neither of those actually apply to me. Although it's interesting, my daughter just came back from the library last night and had a book called "Who is Stevie Wonder?" and we read it this evening. And so I feel like I'm doing my duty as a dad. So yeah, Stevie Wonder meets Dave Matthews. Where do they meet? Not here.
You know, listening to some of your music, I think you do know why they said that, and because you are a white guy with an acoustic guitar and a soulful voice.
Right. That would be the 5-minute take, which is really what they want, right? That's really what a marketing person wants. On the side of an egg carton, it says eggs. It doesn't say from the chicken comes the blah, 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 blah. You know people just want to know, like, what are they buying? What's in the carton?
But, you know, something that little short anecdote, because you don't dwell on it too much in your book, but something that sort of is implied by that is that, you know, you logged some hours and some miles as an artist before you started teaching or developing this way of talking about songwriting and the craft or whatever, which brings us here today. So I guess I would just love for you to tell me kind of what the early part of your journey was like. You know, what was your musical life like originally?
Where to begin? Where should I begin? I could begin at the beginning. I do begin at the beginning in the book, which is to say that I was born backward. It was called a Frank Breech birth, and they don't do them anymore. But that is fancy talk for ass first. So that's the joke in the house is that I never quite turned around. Mm-hmm. And that is pretty much the case. And my dad is a pianist and a doctor, but he's a pianist, took a songwriting course and didn't like it, but didn't want to ask for the money back. So I went in his place because our names are the same, mm-hmm. right? So when they took attendance, it was just like a different guy, but with ID.
How old were you?
This is after college.
Really?
I mean, oh, yeah. I suffered a lot of self-doubt as a kid. And the concept of anyone listening to me was so foreign. And yet what I wanted to do was play and be around it. So I was like, you know what I'll do is I'll learn the guitar and I'll be a sideman. Mm-hmm. And I will facilitate other people's voices. Because there's no one's going to listen to me.
So I did that. That's sort of where I started. Went through college, learned to play, all that kind of stuff.
What did you study in college?
I was an American Studies major.
Where'd you go to school?
I went to Yale, mm-hmm. and I think I wanted to be English, but I think my folks wanted me to go to law school. So I found something which is neither, right? I found like the Dave Matthews meets Stevie Wonder of studies for school. And so goes a lot of my life. Yeah, so I got into that, got into side gig, sideman gigs. I loved heavy music, but I kept getting gigs with female singer-songwriters. And I actually had to buy an acoustic guitar in order to accompany them, and then it just went. And then I was just like the guy who was doing that for a while. I basically lived at some of the clubs, like the Bitter End, at places like that. They kind of offered me a cot because I was just going to be back the next night in another sort of outfit. But a lot of these bands were really bad. And I was like, you know what? I think I can do that. You know, if they're listening to them, maybe they would listen to me, you know? And that's sort of how I started getting into it. And then, like I said, my dad took this weird class at the Songwriters Hall of Fame in New York. And I took it and I wrote a couple of songs, and they were on they were on my first album. I got signed in a couple of years. And then I was out on the road and like with my first songs, which is something I very much do not recommend to my students now. I am very much like adamant that they make as much as possible so that they can live on their catalog, so they can understand how important catalog is. So I'm touring, whatever. I had a couple of record deals. I did a whole bunch of stuff, did a lot of TV work, commercial work, just any kind of work, like a whole array of work. Off the road, I started getting into publishing. So I was the online editor for Blender magazine for a while, which was supposedly like Rolling Stone's snarky younger brother or something. And so I ran that for a bit. And then I got a call to teach. And I was like, I can't do that. I don't really know how. I didn't go to school for it. I didn't, you know, I don't know what I'm doing. You know? Why would I teach that? And my friend luckily did not pay attention to me and booked me for a conference so that I talked to some students. And it was kind of like one of those magical moments. It's like I've had live magical moments like at the Ryman in Nashville or places like that. And I had a moment like that in a conference room at this school. And I've been teaching ever since, all over the place.
Did you have a moment like that when you first started writing songs? I mean, I think it's interesting in the telling of the story that you don't describe those first songwriting experiences as the magic moment, light bulb going off, but you do describe the conference room first teaching experience as a kind of cathartic experience.
Right. I've always sort of looked at I haven't really looked at songwriting as songwriting is really a tonnage game, right? So there's a lot of junk that comes out, you know? It's really a dumpster dive. So when you get something great, I'm incredibly gratified when that happens. But it's like one of those, like if you're actually in a dumpster and you find something else, it doesn't mean the smell goes away suddenly and you have like a hallelujah moment. It's like you're still in a dumpster. You know what I mean? I've been really fortunate that some of the songs have transcended me. You know, they're better than I am. I would say that that's rare. I maybe have like 8 albums out, and there's an album's worth that have really are better than me.
Yeah,
you know. And then it's also weird. I guess I'm very sort of sanguine about this because I wrote pre and post 9/11, and all of my songs changed. And it was a very weird, that was a hallelujah moment. It was not, I played in New York on the 10th of September. And on the 12th, half of my songs made no sense.
So how did they change?
The deeper ones, the ones that were trying to be something, you know, the ones that really I felt connected to or felt like a conduit for, elevated and amplified in a way that has nothing to do with me. It had everything to do with the context. And ones that I thought were funny, you know, good for drunks, you know, good for like fun, good for a party, good for like a snarky whatever for your ex-girlfriend or whatever, became very petty, you know, and very unimportant. And I wouldn't say embarrassing, but like I just stopped playing them.
Yeah.
You know, they're good for someone else, something else. It's weird because I see songs very much as part of the context, which I don't control. And a lot of times when they're really great, they come from a place I also don't control.
Yes. Well, thank you for leading us there, because songwriting for me, I have often kind of assumed, and maybe incorrectly, that songwriting maybe can be learned, but I'm not sure that it can be taught. And
Yes.
on the other hand, you clearly are a very devoted, dedicated teacher to this craft, knowing full well, as you say, that so much of what makes it work is a numbers game and creating the conditions to receive this thing whenever it's going to happen.
Yes. Also effort. Straight up effort. I think there are a lot of people out there who are not as good as they are, if you know what I mean.
Yep.
You know, and it's just the hours that they put in and the effort and the incredible drive.
Can effort be learned or taught, or is effort the sort of ineffable, inherited thing that some have and some, the craving to work, the desire, the drive, is that something that can be cultivated?
I don't know. I'm thinking back towards like, who can I refer to of my students? And sometimes I'll hear a song and it's their first song or something like that. And I'm like, holy crap, that person has it.
Yeah.
I don't know what it is, but they have it. They have a sense of melody. The intent that they're trying to get across exists. And the architecture is a little bit fuzzy, but that's fixable. They have the thing, right? And then there are other people who they're touched by it, but they don't. They're kind of like a boat that isn't quite planing up on the surface, but they can fix that by sheer effort. And you have to want that. And why you want something like that is like, I think you're sort of pointing out to. Like, it is a very ineffable sort of quality. There are lots of reasons. Probably has to do with mom. Probably has to do with dad. Probably has to do with I was beaten up in school or whatever. Whatever drives you is what's going to do that. There's an interesting story. I remember Michael Jordan at the top of his game. Someone asked him like, why do you go? Why do you even show up? You're the best in the world. Everybody knows it. You have all these rings. And he's like, I find a reason. Somebody says something small, like, oh, I think he's over the hill or whatever.
Yeah.
He'll find one thing and that will drive him.
Yeah.
So it's really, it's interesting because some people just naturally have it. Some people don't. And I talk to them about this. I'm like, some are very incredibly successful. And it is not talent that gets them all the way. It's not even a prerequisite.
Yeah.
Some incredible people go off into, and now I've done this enough where I'm writing letters of recommendation to law school.
Yeah.
Letters of recommendation to cantorial school, to all these other different types of schools, because they're like, this just isn't for me. I don't care how talented I am.
Well, I mean, it's funny because I have no doubt in my mind that I am a professional musician, and I also know a handful of lawyers who can play circles around me on their instrument.
Totally. Doctors.
Yeah. Doctors, a lot of doctors.
Doctors are incredible. And, that's kind of what I was trying to get into. And my dad's a doctor, so Freud is here with us today. But I started looking into things like melodic math, which is Max Martin's sort of set of rules or whatever about songwriting and melody writing and such. And I started thinking about it, and I was like, wow, math, that's a weird, melodic math is a strange combination of words. And I started looking back, and like, this goes back centuries, right? And the whole thing is that music is math with you unaware that you're counting. So there's a very interesting, and I talk to them a lot about how do we play with the fact that we're counting without knowing that we're counting. The connection to the sciences and music is so tight that I can totally see a lawyer or a doctor or an engineer who just built their own guitar, can play it better than you, can do everything better than you, and they're just a doctor instead.
Yeah. This thing about math and counting without being aware of it, I mean, it leads us in so many directions. The first place I think of is, these naturally occurring ratios, the Fibonacci sequence, the overtone sequence, these things that inform our idea of beauty without us really knowing it. But that in fact, maybe there is such a thing as beauty and a sort of a rational reason for why we perceive certain things to just work.
Yeah. I mean, I know this is crazy to say because it's supposedly a songwriting book, but I actually did get into that a little bit with Janna Levin, who is a cosmologist and deals with black holes and the way that we finally got to hear the sound of black holes colliding. and gravitational waves and such. And I asked her that. I was like, it's so strange to me, this idea of repetition, which is really numbers repeating, right?
Yes.
So this repetition is like, why are we so into it? Why do we have choruses that repeat? And why are you at the same time looking in a telescope looking for repeating patterns? And she really came to it from a scientific perspective, of course, a non-divine sort of perspective.
Yes.
And was like, this is because math is our ancestry. Our ancestors are the laws of physics, is what she says. So the combinations that have occurred from a molecular point to a larger point to gravitational to the building of planets to the solar system to all of this to us, right? And how we're sort of built means that like those kind of repetitions and that kind of math is really a diorama of who we are. It's like a mirror, you know? And so a song is really like a mirror.
Yeah.
From a numerological standpoint. You know, this doesn't make a kick-ass tune, clearly, because there's other stuff going on. But I check the charts every week with my students, and we check things out. And I'm like, look, you think I'm out of your demographic. You're definitely right. So I'm not going to choose the songs. The people are going to choose the songs. So we go, and we check them out, and we analyze them. Mm-hmm. And the patterns are obvious. The patterns are completely obvious. And it really has to do with the math that we love and what our brains are into.
If I am remembering in the book, one of the things that she says is that she appreciates that a scientific experiment should be able to be recreated multiple times by multiple people. And one of the things that she likes about that is knowing that that's always going to be reliable if you do the science. And
she's so amazing.
But when we write a song, it's our job not only to channel the patterns, but then in some way to subvert them or do something unexpected that hasn't been done. We can't just write a song that was written already. And maybe that's where these are divergent, right? Where we're both counting without counting, but then we also have to be aware of enough of pattern recognition to know when to break the pattern.
Yes, absolutely. I give my students right at the top of the class, I'm like, guys, what is a song? What is it? Like, we have to figure that out first. And so I give them a definition, and the definition is, I just have two goalposts. One is this sort of idea of patterning and the thing that we love. The brain loves patterns of four. Mm-hmm. The brain loves to figure out puzzles, and that basically puzzles are, like rhyme is basically a puzzle completing itself. That's all on one side. And then on the other side, there's this thing that you're talking about, which I found from George Saunders, the author, in a book called The Brain Dead Megaphone, which is that art is a box, and the person who deals with the art, who engages with the art, walks into the box and walks out of the box. And it's our job to do something in that box that is both non-trivial and undeniable. So now your job as a writer is to decide which goalpost are you closer toward, right? I mean, the Max Martin people are certainly going to go further toward the numerological sort of like patterning kind of thing. And then you get like the Bon Ivers or the Max Richters or the whoever's, you know, who really push the other direction into like, all I have to do is be undeniable and non-trivial. I do not need to cater to your sense of counting. Mm-hmm. And then in the middle are the people who understand both and will play. And that's like a Radiohead type of thing, where they'll take the time signature and they'll take you out of 4/4 without really letting you know, right? So you feel the disorientation, but you don't really know why you're feeling disoriented, which is, of course, their entire aesthetic. They want you to feel disoriented and dystopian, you know, because they sort of have that sort of philosophy of where we are in the modern world. So why not go in and out of 5 and 7 and mess with our internal clock, basically? Because it achieves their aims artistically.
Yeah. Or tempo. I mean, the new James Blake record came out this week. I don't know if you've listened to it at all, but I spoke to somebody who was part of the record last week, so I listened to it, and he is not afraid to completely turn left. I mean, it's almost like 2 or 3 different songs that are kind of joined.
Yes, I'm seeing that in my classes, and I'm of so many minds about that because I know, and this is disgusting, but I care for my students and I want them to succeed, and so I just offer everything in types of questions, but that kind of thing will mess with algorithms, right? So, like, you see it in things like the end of "I'm the Bad Guy" from Billie Eilish, right? So, like, she's just sort of like drops off into a whole other thing at the end. I have students who are just like basically putting 2 or 3 songs together.
Yeah.
And it's almost like sonata form.
Yes.
But like, they are not related to one another. And then I'm like, well, what are these dumbass algorithms going to do with that? Are they going to disqualify you for someone who decided to stay morning coffee house and put you on the playlist and get you 1 million followers and blah, 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 So I have to offer them that perspective because more than one thing is being written when a song is being written. But at the end of the day, obviously the art has to win, right?
Well, again, I'm glad that you bring it up because you are teaching some pretty high vibrating ideas here. And at the same time, you're teaching in the context of students who want to succeed, and succeed in the sense of make a living.
Yes.
Support themselves, be professional.
Yes, that is. And when I have office hours, and this is why the book is not like a how-to write song type book, it's because when I have office hours with actual students who are 18 to 22 years old, this is not what they're thinking about. They're not asking me like, oh, my chorus. What is the problem with my chorus? They're like, what am I doing? Is this good? Am I good? Can I do this? Am I, is this viable? What else should I be doing, etc.? They're much bigger life questions. A lot of tears, and the tears are not about the internal rhymes of a second verse. You know what I mean? So that's the kind of stuff that I talk with them about, and I do a lot of talking just in question form because I'm not doing, and I'm not managing, right? I'm not Berry Gordy, and all I'm doing is offering them provocative questions that hopefully they will answer in a way that they can defend going forward.
As the business changes, I think your role is actually one that didn't exist in a previous iteration of the music business, in part because this wasn't information that was taught formally in previous iterations of the music business. You yourself went to Yale with an American Studies degree, then had to sort of figure out how to write a song, have a career, and then emerge with this synthesis of all of these elements. But I'm also reminded through all of this that you started out this conversation by saying you thought that your best role would be in the service of other artists. That was your initial intuition was, I think I will best serve others with whatever I can offer.
Yeah, you know what? I've never made that connection until now. But you're totally right. The connection I have made is that there's so much being a performing songwriter, which is different than being a songwriter.
Yes.
But being a performing songwriter requires a tremendous adjacency to narcissism.
Yeah.
It's a very narcissism adjacent profession.
Yeah.
You have to get on stage and you have to rock it. What teaching has taught me is that I get whatever sort of narcissistic sort of ego or just performative. I get to perform a little, but it's for good. It's literally I'm doing it in a generous kind of fashion. And that kills all the me nonsense of stepping off stage and being like, oh, you're the man, whatever. That kind of thing. At the end of my class, I'm like, geez, I hope they got that. That's a better place to live. And that's why I wrote the book. For the same reason. There's a generosity in it. I know that people feel that like this songwriting is generous, and God bless them. I just feel like it just wasn't my path. It's just not my thing. I still make it. I still love to entertain. I still love to talk. I still love to play, whatever.
Do you still journal?
Oh yeah, all the time. My journals are everywhere. You can't see them right now, but like I journal. I journaled this morning. But yeah, it is this difference between narcissism and generosity that has really turned my head around with teaching. You say in the early pages of the book also you print some reviews or like little blurbs from your students, at the end of the semester when they say things about you. And one of them is, he's great, but he's prone to digression, something like that. Yes. And it's a great preparation for what comes, because I love that you try to solve some of these songwriting questions by talking to people who work outside of the field of songwriting. Like fishing against the stream. Remind me of that anecdote. What a crazy tangent to go on. It's funny you should mention that. I was in office hours yesterday with a student who said that was one of their favorite moments. So basically, I think I've read all of the songwriting books. Like I've gone down the list, and I'm like, maybe not all of them, but kind of all of them. And one of them is Catching the Big Fish by David Lynch. So that's a fantastic book. It's a creativity book or whatever. And he just talked about how, the bait is curiosity or ambition, and the fish are the ideas. So we talk about fishing for ideas all the time. So I was like, I'm going to talk to a fly fisherman. So I happen to know one, a great guy, Greg Felt, who's been fly fishing on the Arkansas River for decades. And he's also a poet. He's an articulate, he's a poet. He's a poetic soul for sure. Also a poet and a writer. So I was like, dude, so you live on a metaphor basically. And so let's just lay it out and talk about the relationship between what you do and what I do. And I went outside of the field because that's, I think, how I understand things a little bit better, is because it's how things act and not how things are. So how fish act and how songs act is they're kind of the same. It's very interesting, but you get a metaphor instead of an explanation, right? So you get to understand things a little bit obliquely, and I think more clearly. I think one of the examples I've used is if you want to know about the sun, you don't look at the sun. You never look at the sun. That's the first thing you don't do. But how does it act? What is it doing? What is it like with gravity? What is it like with other planets? How does it play with the rest of the universe? That's how you find out what the sun is, right? And that's how you find out what songs are. Yes. So I went to lots of different people in different fields in order to understand us and us as songwriters, and then hopefully it transfers to the art. Did your understanding of what a song is or what songwriting is change or evolve as you gathered all of these vast and divergent ideas about it, or did it ultimately support what you suspected already? I think what I ended up with was, and this is, I did not actually end up with this, but I sort of felt that a grand unifying theory was possible, and it had to do with how our molecular structure replicates and does things has application to verses, and verses are like the red herring here. It's like painting. It's like I spoke to a mechanical engineer at Goodyear Tires about circularity and about form and stuff like that. And we're all dealing with the same problem. When I cook now, I think about it in the same way, depending on what I'm cooking. I probably want it to go low and slow and blah, blah, blah. There's a tempo, right? There's a tempo to everything. And there's so many song-like qualities to everything in life. Yes. And that's what I wanted to do, because I hate this thing where as an artist, the art, the preciousness of art and artistry, etc. I just feel like no. I feel like no. Yeah. I feel like it's the same regardless what you're making. Yeah. Anything. Lunch, same,
I feel so close to you right now. You know, I'm reminded of this conversation. I interviewed Melissa Clark, who's a New York Times food writer and a cookbook writer. She referred to the ingredients as her friends. She said before she makes a meal, she lines up all of her friends in front of her and she decides who she wants to hang out with this afternoon. You know, it's like almost like a co-write. You know, who do I want to be in the room with?
It's funny when I'm cooking. I mean, I stink at cooking, but when I do, I see these different spices and I'll try them out. Like I'll hear them in my head. You know, literally hear them in my head. Yeah. So I'm like, in the way that chord changes might apply.
Yeah.
And my wife loves it. She eats it up. I don't know.
Do you think? I mean, song form is evolving. It's changing. Music inevitably is changing. One of the things that comes up in the book is how even the assumptions that we've made about the pop song, like, for example, that the melody of the second verse should more or less be the same melody as the first verse. This may be changing because of the algorithm also and the impatience of people, and that if you kind of have to justify every second of a song today in the pop space in a way that you didn't used to have to. Is songwriting improving?
Wow. I don't think so. I don't think it's improving. I don't think it's on the lack of improvement sort of scale. I think it's gotten more compact. Although there's an argument against that as well, because like I have to always bring up, and I don't like to bring up the Beatles in a songwriting class because there's no bigger cliche in the world, but their songs were incredibly short and incredibly tight and incredibly adherent to the same things we see on the Billboard charts right now.
Yes.
You know, numbers are way up. People listen to more music than ever. Does that make it better? I don't know. I don't know if it gets better or not better.
Wait, are people listening to more music than ever?
Well, they're able to.
Right.
That's really the reason. I mean, when we had, 3 TV channels and you could only get like vinyl, it was just harder to do, Now I could listen to anything in 2 seconds.
Well, that's exactly it. You could listen to anything. Right. I mean, there's no way to have this conversation without sounding like a total grandpa, and I'm so aware of it. And I think part of what has changed in the way music is consumed, at least for me, because I suffer from it in the same way we suffer from, I suffer from the addiction to my phone the same way my young friends do. It's hijacked my brain the same way it hijacks everybody's brain. That when every album I listened to was a result of having spent $15 of my own to go to the store and buy it and listen to it, I really listened to it, and I absorbed it in a way that I am in the same body, in the same person, unable to do when I find a record on Spotify.
Yeah. Well, we have that conversation too, Yeah. A lot of it is like, okay, so now you've made a song. What's your plan? Is this a singles only thing? Are you going to roll singles out? Is it going to be an EP or an LP? What kind of artist are you? Right? So the technology has changed that conversation, because on vinyl, it was like a side 1 song versus a side 2 song or something. Like, what's going to open the second side?
Yeah.
Well, nothing now. I used to love last songs on albums.
Yep, me too.
Now I don't know that, they're only last songs on albums for album artists.
Yep.
Right? Others are they just leak single, right? And then they'll come out with like the package, the full package, which is just a repackaging of the same thing. It's just a complete question. So, I mean, your question was, are people listening to more music than ever? They certainly are. And there is no way that, they are making more than ever. I mean, I think when I did the research for the book, it was like 40,000 songs a day are popping up onto Spotify. I'm sure it's up from there. There's just no way, because we're in a time-based art, right? So like there's just literally no time to do it. And according to Hitmakers, a book by Derek Thompson, who is amazing, if you are looking for another guest, I don't know him, but I'm just saying, 90% of the stuff we listen to is stuff we've already heard, right? Because we like repeat listens. So that's 10% of all things. And again, I spoke with Shane McAnally, who is a big Nashville writer for the book, and he was like, skip rate, are we thinking about skip rate? Hell yeah, we are, all the time. And the second verse, as you said, is actually one thing that we do is different. We do different melodies, but also different singers, right? So just like the past 3 weeks, it's been like the number one hits have been like Coldplay and BTS, right? So they can actually switch off verses. Industry Baby was Lil Nas X and Jack Harlow or something. That's another, but two people, and they're switching off. The most interesting thing to me was this past week, Industry Baby and a song called Fancy Like by Walker Hayes, which is a total pickup truck country tune, were the 2 and 3 songs in the country. Couldn't be more different aesthetically. First chorus hits the same second.
And is it playing by the Max Martin rules of getting to the chorus as quickly as possible?
They're all doing that. And it was what was shocking to me that the 2 and 3 songs didn't open with the chorus. Whereas, it was Stay by Justin Bieber and Kid Laroi. That's the number 1 track, opens with the chorus, right? And like opening with the chorus has been like a thing for number 1 songs for reasons including TikTok, basically.
Well, right. So obviously you are of a different generation, a different demographic, a different, whatever than your students. I know that you, despite having liked heavy music, maybe because of your putting in those hours at the bitter end, ended up appreciating artists like Katie Lang. You've got Jonathan Brooke blurbing your book. I mean, you have an aesthetic, regardless of what's on the charts, that is slower and more patient and more, I don't want to say more thoughtful, but maybe asks a little more of the listener. Maybe that's not fair to say, but I think you know what I'm getting at.
I do know what you're getting at. It's a writing thing.
It's a writing thing. What does that mean?
It's a writing thing in that I have a couple of headspaces, and just some are deeper than others, right? So some people will pull from one of their headspaces and be like, in my contemplative moments, I hear my contemplative songs, now I'm going to put it out, and I'm Norah Jones or whoever. But, I have these like angry moments or shallow moments or, trying to be funny moments or whatever. And like, I feel like they combine to an idea. I've noticed that the contemplative ones are the ones that are better, because they're deeper and they come from a deeper place. But as I said before, like I came up solo live.
Yeah.
Like I was signed off a bandstand. I was not signed off a kick-ass demo, and they were like, we want to give you a contract. We don't know what the album's going to be like because you don't have any musicians, but we'll figure something out, So I've played to try to keep an audience locked, and sometimes they tend to drink and they tend to be rowdy. And so you got to get up over them and you have to say stuff, to like get them and to do stuff like that. My real hero is Ani DiFranco, and she tough, great player, snappy. She's good with a one-liner. God, I love him. And I seeing her live is just like people go up on the lyrics,
Man, she probably set me back 5 years as an artist because of how great she was. I mean, in the sense that I was in my head for years. If I can't write a lyric that makes somebody feel the way Ani DiFranco makes me feel, then what am I doing?
Fact. That is absolutely. And by the way, since we're talking about books, I don't know if you've checked out her memoir.
Yeah, I haven't read it yet. I really am looking forward to it.
When I say I put it next to Just Kids, like the Patti Smith memoir, it's that. She's, from a business point of view, from an artistic point of view, from an instrumental point of view, part of the reason that I play some of the things I play is because I saw her band play stuff, and I just went out the next day and bought that, not knowing how to play it. But from a business standpoint as well, I mean, I've totally followed her. And now as a teacher, I feel like a lot of her prognostications have come true. You know, I think a lot of students don't have to sign anything. And when they do sign things, even with majors, I don't want to get into, I don't know, shop or whatever too much, but like there are reversion clauses, like, you know, which means like they'll get the master recording back after certain amounts of time. This is stuff Billy Joel doesn't have. You know, this is stuff Stevie Wonder doesn't have, you know, whatever.
And even Taylor Swift having to go back and re-record her.
Taylor Swift, yeah. I mean, this is new stuff based on leverage and how the leverage has changed for the students. So, you know, when they are like, I got a record deal, I'm like, well, let me see it. Because I worry for them, you know?
The reason we got here is because, and I'm reminded now that you say this thing in the beginning of your book also, where you say, look, if, relative to the Saunders thing, you say, if we're only going to evaluate something's success based on its ability to perform in the market, then one would infer that McDonald's is the best food in the world.
Right.
So we can't just assume that because it's successful, it means it's good. And I love that you asked that question. What kind of song do you want to write?
Yeah.
What kind of artist do you want to be? But if you're going to ask that question, you also have to be aware of what's working right now, which is, I guess, where the charts come into it.
That's interesting. That McDonald's thing was really interesting because I was like, oh, of course, this makes so much sense, right? Like, this irrefutable.
Yeah.
So I went, and I always am looking to learn and stuff. So what I did is I took Ryan Tedder's monthly.com, like how to write a hit song course. You know, it's on monthly.com. I don't know if you've ever seen it or others have seen it, whatever. You know, Ryan Tedder, huge hit maker, and he has this course. And in the course, he's like, think about it like McDonald's. Like, you get the consistency, how awesome that is, how like you, and he was using McDonald's as like a great example of what is good. And I sat there and I thought about it. I was like, okay, what are you going to say to that? You know, like both are right, you know? And so I try never to pontificate, I guess, but I want to keep asking questions that hopefully will yield good answers, productive answers for them. They can hate me and write more songs, then I win. That's a win for everybody. It's important to ask these questions, and to me, it was also important to ask questions that maybe are not asked in the other books that I've read. So there was a competitive analysis going on. Like when I made a book proposal, they were like, "Well, what's your book like, and how is it different?"
Yes.
So you know, I was very cognizant of that kind of thing, of like asking the right type of new kind of question. I don't know if they're the right question, but new question that hopefully will unlock something. And I think it's going well. I mean, I'm really happy. All of the stuff that I've talked about is stuff I've been talking about for years.
Yeah.
So it's like, to me, it was like, you know, transcribing a stand-up routine.
Yes.
You know, so I know that some of the jokes work because I've seen them work. You know, so that's been gratifying, and the ability to give access to this stuff, because I'm also very aware at how expensive these schools are. $65,000 a year or something for NYU, and then you live in New York, so a lot of people just don't have access to this stuff. I feel like the book was the best way I could also give access to this information in a way that was cost effective, you know?
I do, and it's always, to me, just sitting under the surface. But particularly when I ask you a question like, is songwriting getting better given all of these tools that we have? Because the Great American Songbook, the great songwriting teams of the 50s and 60s, most of them were either immigrants or first generation, middle class at best, people who intuitively channeled this feeling, this emotion, and the math without counting into, like it or not, I mean, I love it, but even if you're a young kid who would like to essentially rewrite the whole rule book, established what we take as popular music, you know, and these were largely not highly educated kids with a lot of access. These were people that were doing it from a very intuitive space. Now we're talking about paying for the privilege of access. And, one question is, are we cutting those kinds of people out of the process, or is there still an on-ramp for them?
Sure. I mean, I don't have an answer for that. It's a systemic situation. As I said, I backed into teaching. Like, I am shocked, but have loved it. And I have talked about this. I've talked about two things. One is to really talk to artists about how to make, keep, invest, and grow money, which is the most unsongwriterly thing you can think of. But the course I want to teach is called How Do I Get Paid? That's it. And then the other thing I kind of want to do is maybe move out of the college thing sort of entirely and give it to folks who can't afford it or who don't want to afford it. And by the way, $60,000 a year, if you don't want to afford that, you are completely within your right. That is a big investment.
Is part of what you're getting access? For example, I have a transcription of your best jokes, and they definitely work. But what I don't have necessarily, if I have your book, is your ear, your headspace, access to you. Is that what you're really? What are you paying for $60,000? I don't want to ask you to talk out of turn. I know the studio is great. I know the facilities are great. I know there's incredible. But is it also access?
Well, it is a lot of that. There's a lot of access, especially at the places that I teach. It's very different on each time. I have to say, I'm not sure that, I teach at Yale. I'm sure they don't know what to do with me. I teach at Wesleyan. Everything goes. It's great. I love it there. At Clive, there is a lot of access. They are. It's a very driven program because it's focused on that. So, what do you get? You get that, and you also get the network, right? I'm crazy on them for getting together, knowing each other across years, and across schools, right? So, when a Wesleyan band plays with a NYU band and they're on the same bill, and maybe I got them together for whatever reason, that's it. That's an incredibly gratifying thing. How to bridge those things is a long road, bridging access is a long road, and it does taking money out of the equation is what it takes,
Well, at the same time, you have Rick Beato, and you have all these online courses, and you have all this treasure trove of information that's available for free.
Right.
Or cheaply.
And that, by the way, is insane.
Yeah.
It's incredible what's there. Rick Beato's amazing, but also, if I ever have a problem and I'm recording or on Logic or whatever, something is sticking or not working, whatever, I just go to YouTube.
Yep.
So there's an incredible democratization going on. And there's also a network.
Yep.
Right? People connecting on SoundCloud or wherever they're connecting, there is a lot of that stuff.
Yep.
So brings up a different question, I guess, but what are you getting for $60,000, that you can't get on YouTube? And I did think of that as well as when I was writing, and it was how original can I be? I try to keep the tone of the class up and weird and very much anything goes kind of. So I make a stand early on to I'm going to be the biggest dummy in the room, right? So I'm going to lower the bar for idiocy so that you can actually say stuff that you would be afraid to do in a more uptight situation. It can be a sociology class, but there's also the journaling element to it, and the plumbing of your own depth kind of thing that I offer to them, and I make them write in longhand, and because it's a very performative style of recording an idea, and I try to get them to do the eternal thing, which is to get inside yourself, right? So then it moves outside of a sociology class, and it's sort of applied sociology for profit,
Right. Right.
or something along those lines.
Right.
because they don't know what they're going to do. And hopefully these skills are transferable to anything, you know?
Well, you know, my dad is a musician also, and he always said he always thinks about music in terms of the jazz experience because he identifies as being a jazz musician. And he always said, you know, you're really transforming yourself when you play music. He likes to say, if you blow through the same copper tube as a saxophone player for 60 years, that tube is unchanged and you are transformed. That by playing the music, you are transforming yourself. And I think in that way, these ideas, you know, all of these ideas are easily transferable outside of writing a hit song.
That copper tube is so interesting, right? I mean, that's song form.
Right.
Right? You're blowing through song form and transforming at the same time.
Yes.
I mean, it is different every time. And even when like we have all these like lawsuits and stuff going on with like things that sound alike and what is copyright and all this kind of thing. I mean, it happens everywhere. Jerry Saltz, the art critic, was on Twitter today just going like, oh, it looks like people who love art that looks like art that was cool at one point are now that's cool, you know? And so people like look-alike Van Goghs are going for $13 million or whatever. And he's annoyed by that. And I'm like, well, have you heard Blurred Lines? You know, like, but then have you heard about the Renaissance? That was a rebirth of other stuff that already existed, you know? So I don't know. I don't know where these things go. But at the end of the day, if a songwriter leaves with more stuff than they walked in with, everybody wins. And that's really the only way I can judge my own success.
Yes.
Right.
Well, I mean, I will just give you the personal anecdote that I am transformed on some level by having read the 2/3 of the book that I have read so far.
Man.
And I knew it in the
Thank
first
you.
5 pages. You know, I mean, it was like, this is just great. And in large part because it is not playing by the typical rules. You know, I mean, it's asking a lot of provocative questions.
Yeah. And that's all I can do. I mean, because anyone can tell you where to put a chorus. Anyone. Literally. Open with it. There you go. Everybody, you want the big key? Open with the chorus. But it's the other stuff, you know? And I'm sorry, this is not a tangent. I know that we have talked about tangents, but I am not confident that every student who comes into my class is going to end up being a songwriter.
Right.
So I don't want their time to be wasted here. So I do want them to have transferable skills into something else, if that's where they choose to go. So that if you study anything deeply, they all connect in some psychic way, you know? That's what I was saying before about, like, if there is a unified theory of any sort, it's that these things do connect. In the math, sure, but in the intent, sure, and in the way that you approach something, you know?
Yes. Well, and I think to an extent that's why I was bringing up this question of whether or not songwriting is getting better or not, because I think that you need to have a kind of richness of experience beyond. I mean, maybe I'm wrong. I know some brilliant songwriters who really have just been dedicated from day one to writing songs. That's what they think about. That's what they do. That's what they're all about, you know? And I always sort of believed, and maybe it was because I heard in the writing of Ani DiFranco and the people who spoke to me when I was younger, that they were political and they were thoughtful and that they were literate and they were thinking about things that were bigger than songwriting.
Yeah. I don't see, you mentioned the P word, political. I don't see a lot of that. I don't see a lot of it in class. And a lot of people are, you know, will say things like, oh, that's so next level or whatever. And they are talking next level production wise, but they're not talking about songwriting. But when I saw something like Inside by Bo Burnham, I don't know if you've seen that.
Oh yeah.
I mean, I was like, I've been playing Bo Burnham for my students since I started teaching because it was so biting.
Yeah.
And accurate and intelligent and also fun. And it kind of has like a pop sheen, but the pop sheen actually is thin enough that no one's fooled, you know, and that even that seems sort of like part of it. But Inside was really like, wow, let's take a bat to Jeff Bezos. Like nobody in my class is doing that.
Yeah.
You know, That to me is really interesting.
Well, and you bring it up in the book also that creativity by committee can produce very reliable results, but it's very hard to get a committee to make a political statement that is biting and coherent.
Yes. A maverick mind actually gets milk toasted when things are happening by committee, because a lot of times when you're in a committee, you're trying to be cool, right? So like a lot of coolness that's an idea killer for some people.
Yeah.
It can be very exciting for others. I think it was David Byrne who said, like, when you get committee sort of co-writing, you get this sort of pleasant ambiguity of a multiplicity of opinions all mixed together, and so it's actually very universal.
Yeah.
Because you've created a small universe,
Yeah.
and then you made something as a result. Sure, I mean that also is cool.
Yeah.
I mean that also works, but I don't know if you've ever been in like a community, brainstorming thing. It's like, it's the blowhards who talk real loud and everything else, and and a lot of people who are introverts, like songwriters, do better on their own.
Yeah. Well, and also, I understand you say that it's a cliche to talk about Lennon and McCartney because it just is. But, one thing that you can say about the two of them is that they were well matched for one another in the sense that they could both write a great song on their own, and they wanted to please the other one, and they wanted to outdo the other one. And that level of compatibility, I think, comes through in the songwriting, as opposed to being in a room with a track person, a top liner, and whatever. And in the times that I've been in those situations, I find it hard to even know what to do or say because I never thought about the division of labor in those terms when it came to writing songs.
Yeah. I have students who are just top liners.
Yeah.
And, or just track writers, or just this or just that. And I mean, there are students who say that, they've gotten cuts and these big hits and all this kind of thing. And then the song comes out and there are like 10 other people on the track that they never even met.
Yeah.
They don't even know who they are. And they don't know why and what they did. They don't even know what they did.
Yeah.
It's just different. It's like the Henry Ford model. It's like if it's a tonnage game, then let's get the conveyor belt.
Yeah.
It's not better. It's not worse. It can lead to experiments, collisions that never would have happened.
Sure.
So that's really cool. You have to be of that mind.
Yeah.
You have to be that kind of person.
Do you see pop music as... there was what we could, I think, have traditionally, and again, this has changed and certainly in my lifetime. I guess I always thought that all pop music was in response to the 1960s. When I grew up, everything was kind of relative to the 1960s. And I think maybe part of the reason talking about the Beatles is such a cliche is because if you're 22 years old, the Beatles don't mean to you and probably didn't even mean to your parents what they meant to somebody who's in their 40s today and what the Beatles may have meant to their parents or their parents' generation. But one thing about the Beatles and the generation of the 60s and what sort of followed is that it still is continued to be, I think, considered to be part of popular music.
Mm-hmm.
But today, because of the way the cycle is, do you find artists, young aspiring artists who are interested in making music that will resonate a generation from now?
I mean, there's lip service given to that for sure, but there always is, right? There's always you always want a timeless something or other, right? But, and the 60s people, the 60s writers and such, got a couple of bumps. They got a couple of helps. They hit and the entire LP sort of wave went away, and then everyone got the same songs again on CD. Yeah. And then they did it again on iTunes, and then now they got it on streaming or whatever. And there was an expanded version of Let It Be just dropped on Spotify today. I just got an email on it. So they're alive and well. And Prince has records coming out. But the search for timelessness has a lot to do with things like optimism for the future, which is not very much in fashion. I'm getting a lot of songs, particularly during COVID, but after that, a lot of wariness about where we're headed, where things are going. And I do think that has to do with the timelessness or the longevity that they feel a song is going to have. You know, they also see I think they see the sales spikes as very, very sharp.
Yes.
And then dropping immediately, to the point where like it's when I feel like a grandpa when I'm like hearing about an artist and going like, is this someone I have to commit to memory, or is this gonna like, you know, is this just like one of those things that is just gonna drop off because like I didn't find it organically, and I'm not really sure about this one, you know, so I pick them. Like Billie Eilish, I was like, I'm gonna Lord, yeah. But like there are others who are just like, yeah, no, forget it. Madison Cunningham, yes. I feel like that train is going to go for a long time.
Yeah.
So, yeah, are they looking for timelessness? I think they're looking to pop. They're looking to go viral. They're not looking to go viral in 15 years.
Right.
You know,
Right.
They may very well, you know, but they want to pop on TikTok.
Yeah.
You know, that's the radio, right? That's the radio of today. So
Sure.
I read who is Stevie Wonder to my daughter, and he was trying for the same thing. Berry Gordy was looking for the same thing that they're looking for today. And that's why there's no such thing as grandpa to me.
Yeah.
Because like the architecture is the same, the goals are the same. The brain has not evolved in such a fashion that these languages are unrecognizable. You know, and what's more interesting to me is what doesn't change than what does change. And I mentioned this in the book. This is something that Jeff Bezos said. Like someone asked, like, what's the future, Jeff? You would know, right? And he's like, well, the future is what won't change. People are going to want stuff cheaper, and they want it delivered to their house faster. Like they wanted that 10 years ago. They're going to want it in 10 years. So let's innovate towards that, you know? So that's, the future is very, it's hard. And there's a lot of lip service given to timelessness, but I think that just means like, don't use the hot plug-in, you know?
Right.
That's not necessarily
right.
going to make something timeless, you know?
Well, Mike, we could talk for another hour, and I hope that we get to in the future, and maybe we'll talk at the second edition of the book or sometime between now and then. But I really appreciate it, and I think it's an incredible resource, and it's in the short stack of books that I have a feeling I'm going to come back to.
Oh, that's awesome! And this conversation is a long time coming.
No kidding.
Yeah, it's very cool.
There he was, my friends, Mike Errico. Go check out his book, Music, Lyrics, and Life, A Field Guide for the Advancing Songwriter. I'll be back in your headspace before you know it. Until then, I'll talk to you soon.